this, that one of the Trump administration has said Trump isn't playing 3D chess, he's playing 12D chess, and that he basically throws out all these contradictory things because he wants to keep the enemy guessing. Now, maybe that's true. But it might also be, I would offer up as an alternative theory, that he's got himself into something that he quickly has realized is not a good idea, but not because taking out the Iranian regime is not a sound idea in principle, or they've been an appalling repressive regime. Not a good idea because the Iranians have hit back in a way I think that they've been taken by surprise by the scale of it, economically, by closing the Strait of Hormuz, by attacking the Gulf states, and that the combined effect of this has been a shuddering shock to the global economy. And so Trump wants out, and yet it's very difficult to see how he gets out with a convincing claim of victory. So those are the theories. What's your view?
I mean, at the end of the day, my view from the very beginning, and still my view to this day, is that this operation, whatever it is, has to be seen through to the end, because the worst case scenario is that this war ends and the regime is still in power. That's worse than if the war never happened at all. And so in terms of what I'm here to do, or what Goldie is here to do, is represent, these sentiments of the Iranian people and how we feel about what these military strikes are doing, which are targeting an oppressive regime that, we all know has been oppressing the Iranian people for 47 years. In terms of the military strategy, that's not really within our purview. The only thing that we can do is trust that the United States government knows what it's doing and has an effective plan to remove this regime.
Okay, but explain this to me. I get that. But let me just ask you this. Donald Trump said yesterday that the mission of making it impossible for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon had now been achieved. It seems to be where he's edging now as the sort of totality justification for the action he took. But there's one problem, is that all the enriched uranium remains untouched, underground in Iran. The capacity to develop that into a nuclear weapon remains exactly as it was before this war was started. So I don't understand how Donald Trump, or anybody, frankly, can claim that they have stopped Iran from being able to develop a nuclear weapon when all the tools they need remain exactly where they were before it started.
Well, that's the question that's on everybody's mind, right? The only thing that we've ever asked is for this war to go to completion and for this regime to be removed. It was never in our imagination that you would stop at the point that their nuclear capabilities were decapitated. We were told that the end of this war would be when this regime fell, that uncompromising surrender. That's the only ambition that we were ever told. So I don't know what to tell you about this falling short at just, well,
I'm going to bring the others in. I mean, Anna Kasparian, that's really interesting because Elika's reflecting there what so many people are thinking, which is the goalposts have changed so often. It was early on, this was going to be regime change. And they thought by decapitating the top of the regime, killing the Ayatollah and a lot of the top people, then naturally, and apparently this was what the Israelis told the Americans, there will be uprisings and the regime will topple. None of that has happened. So they've now moved, it seems to me, to a different game plan, which is actually what we meant all along, was degrading their military and stopping them building a nuke. They've done the first, that has to be accepted. They've massively degraded the Iranian military, but they've come nowhere near to stopping them developing a nuclear weapon, if Iran chooses to, because the uranium is still there.
Unfortunately, you have two different countries that are involved in this effort to, I guess, either topple the regime in Iran, which isn't going to happen, or, degrade Iran's military capabilities and ability to build nuclear weapons. For the Israelis, it was never, ever about nuclear weapons. It was never about degrading Iran's military capabilities. It was always about regime change for them. But in order to build consent or manufacture consent among the American people for a war that we all knew was going to be a disaster, the American people were fed lies and all sorts of fear-mongering about how Iran is such a threat that we need to get involved and we need to disarm the Iranians. Okay, how's that working out for us? There was no strategic military plan in place. Elika is on the propaganda wing, and she's like, oh, I don't know, it's not my job to think about the military strategy. No, Elika, it is your job to think about military strategy because you're advocating for something that's going to get American soldiers killed. It's going to get innocent civilians killed. In fact, that's happening right now as we speak. And so you should ask yourself, is there really a reliable path here, a militaristic path that's going to secure what I personally want, which is regime change? And honestly, there isn't a path. There isn't a path. First of all, I don't have a path because I've analyzed the situation and realized that Iran has a formidable military and that we're going to put soldiers in jeopardy by taking them over there. I didn't interrupt you, and you're interrupting me. Why are you interrupting me? Piers, are you going to intervene? Because she's interrupting me.
Yes, I think that's a fair comment. You shouldn't interrupt each other because we can't hear either of you when you do. So
I appreciate it. It is important to ask yourself, as you're advocating for military action, whether or not that military action is going to secure the gains that you're advocating for. And if you looked at the landscape, if you looked at the terrain in Iran, if you looked at what Iran is capable of doing, the fact that they control the Strait of Hormuz, you would think about all these elements before spouting off about getting the United States involved in a war that isn't going to secure what you think it's going to secure. There isn't going to be regime change in Iran. And by the way, I think it's disgusting that we are dragged into a war on behalf of a foreign country that does does not plan to put any of their boots on the ground. Not a single IDF soldier is
Well,
planning
that's a
to be
really
on the ground
that's
in
a
Iran.
really interesting point. Let me bring in Goldie Gamari. Welcome back to Uncensored, because it seems to me, look, I'm not a military expert, but a lot of my family have served at high level in the British military, and there's only one way to get that enriched uranium, and therefore be sure that you can prevent Iran in the future developing a nuclear weapon, because they're very advanced as it is with this uranium. And the only way you can do it is with ground forces. The problem is it's incredibly dangerous, that operation, because of the terrain there, because of the way you would have to do it, because of the embedded defenses that the Iranians clearly have, the drones they have, and so on. This could very quickly, if America tried to do this, and I think it's perfectly reasonable, Anna, to point out, so far there's no suggestion the IDF will join this, even though it's clear from Marco Rubio's own mouth that America went into this because the Israelis said, we're doing it with or without you.
We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces, that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. We went proactively in a defensive way.
If it becomes a ground war, this could become very quickly disastrous. I mean, do you accept there's that risk here?
There's always a risk in everything that happens, but I mean, ultimately, we're dealing with the most powerful military in the world, the U.S. military. Their intelligence is top notch. President Trump himself has said that the reason that he decided to begin this as he calls it, an excursion into Iran is not because of Israel, it's because he assessed the threats to the United States. And, obviously the commander-in-chief of the United States of America has way more intelligence information than, just random podcasters on YouTube. So, I trust President Trump. I trust his analysis. And Pete Hegseth has also said that the vast majority of the Islamic regime's ground forces it has been destroyed. Their drones, their missiles, everything. So the only thing that's really left of the Islamic regime is just their paramilitary forces. In fact, they're so weak that they're now not only bringing militia groups from Iraq, but they're now actually conscripting 12-year-old children, which is a war crime. So the Islamic regime is now using children to fight.
But if they're that weak, all right, look, let's take for a moment your premise that they've been almost obliterated, which I keep hearing. Okay, but from where I'm looking, the regime has not been displaced. I mean, Donald Trump this morning put out a new post on Truth Social saying Iran's new president, much less radicalized and far more intelligent than his predecessors, has just asked the United States of America for a ceasefire. We will consider when the Hormuz Strait is open, free and clear. Until then, we're blazing Iran into oblivion, or as they say, back to the Stone Ages, his usual hyperbolic rhetoric. But we don't know who he's talking about, by the way, because no one's come forward from the Iranian side to say, yes, that's me, and we are talking to the Americans.
And Piers, I think that's actually very funny because as far as we knew, the president was Pezeshkian. If President Trump is saying that there's a new president, does that mean Pezeshkian has been obliterated?
Well, that's why I said, we don't know who this guy is. We don't know that he's much less radicalized because we've no idea who it is, or that he's more intelligent than his predecessors. It could just be Trump playing games, trying to divide and rule with the IRGC. That's highly likely, I would think. And maybe that's an effective tactic. Maybe that's an effective tactic. We shall see. With all these things, once a war starts, it's very, very difficult to predict how this plays out. But what I would say about the strength of the American military is there's been an asymmetric war going on here. And I'll bring Aaron in here. The asymmetric war is that you've got the American and Israeli combined incredibly powerful military, the most powerful military we've ever seen in this planet, waging merry hell across the skies of Tehran. But at the same time, the Iranians, like I said earlier, very skillfully and with great cunning, it has to be said, doing a very effective job in economically strangling the world through the Strait of Hormuz, and also strangling the economies of the Gulf states, its neighbors, by attacking refineries, by attacking tourist areas, and so on. This has been very effective. I think far more effective than the Americans and Israelis thought may happen. So you've got two wars going on here, and my guess is because of the pain that's happening at the gas station prices, food prices to come because fertilizer's been shut and so on, you're going to see a lot of fallout from this all summer. You've got the midterm elections in America in November. Donald Trump is many things, but he's not politically stupid. He will know that they could take an absolute beating in the midterms and render him a lame duck if he doesn't do something to resolve where he is right now. I think he wants out, which is why he keeps talking about 2 to 3 weeks, I'm gone, and whatever. What do you feel?
I think his foremost concern right now is calming the markets. And that's why he keeps saying that he's having these great talks and they're getting somewhere and he's going to wrap this up really soon. I can't divine what's in his head anymore. I used to think he had smart political instincts, but I think going to war against Iran in a completely unjust, unprovoked fashion has blown up that impression for me. And there's a debate going on right now that we're having about whether or not the Trump-Netanyahu war in Iran is effective. I think we're missing a more fundamental question. Is it right? Is it just? And the fact that Iran is waging asymmetrical warfare underscores a really important point. It's the weaker party militarily, which underscores it's not a threat to anyone. Trump went to war because Iran acts as a deterrent to U.S. and Israeli hegemony in the region. That's not a threat to anyone's security. It's a threat to domination. And that's why Iran is being subjected to these attacks. And it's whether or not Trump can achieve his goals or not, it doesn't obscure the fact that it's fundamentally illegal. Under the standards of the Nuremberg trials, aggression is the supreme international crime. That is what Trump undertook here. Even his own intelligence agencies affirmed a year ago, and this hasn't changed, that Iran did not have a nuclear weapons program. It limited its missile ranges. At best, they said by 2035.
Okay, but hang on that point, because we do know they were clearly lying about the capacity of their missiles, right? They fired a missile only last week, which went twice as far, a ballistic missile, twice as far as they had said that their missiles were capable of going. It didn't actually land on its target, but the distance it traveled would mean it could potentially get to Europe, it could get to London, to Paris, whatever. That is in direct contradiction to the undertakings Iran are given about the distances its missiles could go. So they've clearly been lying.
Well, not necessarily, because first of all, even NATO said we can't confirm that Iran fired that missile. So I'm not even sure that it was Iran. But let's say it was Iran. If it was Iran, then it's quite possible they put on.
Well, who else fired it?
Well, listen, I wouldn't put anything past Israel. They carry out all sorts of nefarious acts all the time. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a false flag. Listen, let's assume it was Iran.
Well, hang on, Aaron. You're expecting me to believe that Israel deliberately fired a ballistic missile at an American base.
Yeah, that happens. That happens. Believe it or not, that has happened in the past.
Yeah, Israel decades ago attacked the USS Liberty, killed a bunch of U.S. soldiers. So actually, I wouldn't put it past them. Listen, let's assume it was Iran. Let's assume it was Iran. Just one second. I'll just finish this point. Is it
possible?
If it was Iran, if I can finish this point, it's possible they put a smaller payload on the missile, which means it can travel further. And regardless, look, this whole debate is skewed because Iran is defending itself against an act of unprovoked aggression, an act that is not targeting the quote-unquote regime. It's hitting schools. They massacred over 150 girls in the opening hours of this unprovoked war. They're hitting pharmaceutical plants that make medicine for Iranians.
On this point,
they're hitting residential buildings.
Yeah, but Aaron, the idea. Okay, but look, I have serious misgivings about this war and have done from the start. I do not think that Iran had an imminent capacity to have a nuclear weapon or to use one. I think that is nonsense, and also flies completely in the face of what we were told after the 12-day war last summer. We were told that whole capacity had been destroyed anyway. So none of that makes any sense to me. But the idea that Iran had never provoked either Israel or the United States, I mean, that is also patently disingenuous because Iran for the last few decades has systematically waged a campaign of terror through the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and other proxies against Israel. Ayatollah has led the chants of death to America, death to Americans. They have killed, I think, more Americans than any other nation in the world, right, in the last 47 years. So this idea that this has all happened out of nowhere, I just think it's disingenuous.
I think the fundamental problem in the region is that you have an Israeli government that gives itself the right to displace the indigenous Palestinians, steal their land, and deny them a homeland. And Iran, on that question, has been far more accommodating than Israel and the U.S. have in terms of accepting the international framework for the Israel-Palestine issue. Iran has said that they would support the Arab Peace Initiative, which offered Israel full normalization if it allowed Palestinians to have a state in just 22% of historic Palestine. Iran has cooperated with the U.S. in the past. You mentioned earlier that Trump is turning his back on NATO, and NATO helped the U.S. in Afghanistan. So did Iran. Iran provided critical intelligence to the U.S. that helped the U.S. capture fighters from al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And that was blown up when George W. Bush gave a speech declaring Iran to be part of the axis of evil. The U.S. Ambassador Ryan Crocker said that seriously undermined Iran's cooperation, which was very, very fruitful. And there have been so many more diplomatic initiatives since. Iran sent Bush a letter offering to resolve all these issues. Bush ignored it. There was the Iran nuclear deal, which even Trump's own administration certified that Iran was complying with.
And what about the